Hello and welcome to After Scientology Straight Up and Vertical, the show where me and Tony Ortega go over last week's reporting on Scientology matters. And of course, the hot topic right now, the only real topic that anybody is talking about is the Danny Masterson case. This is a very big deal. And we are moving to wrapping this thing up. And so this last week had some, well, bombshell is, I think, the right word for some of the things that went down this last week. It was really quite something. Tony, welcome to the show as usual.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Okay. And we had, well, you were in the courtroom. You saw a lot of stuff. I think maybe the first thing we want to talk about, and I had my lawyer friend and I did a show on Friday night where we talked about the leak and how it would be dealt with. I was curious from the legal perspective, what are the possible penalties and how does this process work and that kind of thing. And we gave a little conjecture about, you know, where it could have come from. But I'm really curious about your thoughts on this whole thing. This material was leaked to the Church of Scientology. That was the discoveries, redacted discovery materials. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, you guys probably have the legal side covered. I can just give you some of the atmospherics of what it was like, because it was Wednesday morning. We were waiting for a new witness. The prosecution has really been ripping through its case, and we were ready for a number of new witnesses that day, but they took time out because the DA had this incredible story about how they had just found out the night before that Vicky Podreski, on behalf of the Church of Scientology, had met with the chief of the LAPD, which is really strange, and then had sent an email to the DA's office. Now, what Podreski is doing, and, you know, just a little sidelight that just drives me crazy. I mean, we know she's working for the Church of Scientology. She's been working for them for years. Earlier that week, she had told Channel 7 that she was complaining about the coverage and the fact that I was appearing on Channel 7. And she said that Channel 7 had basically mischaracterized her as an attorney for the Church of Scientology. When at the same exact time she was telling Channel 7 that she didn't work for Scientology, the same exact time she's meeting with the chief of the LAPD on behalf of the Church of Scientology.
Right.
This is the just sort of flat out deception you can expect from Scientology and its agents. Okay. And I know this is a sidelight, but that Channel 7 thing had some repercussions. And I wish these, channels would understand, every time a Scientology attorney opens their mouth, you're not getting the truth. All right. So why was Vicky Podreski meeting with the chief of police of the LAPD, and why was she emailing the district attorney? You know, Chris, there's this parallel case going on along with the Danny Masterson criminal rape trial of a civil lawsuit by the same women about the harassment they say they've been going through from the Church of Scientology. That case is actually on hold.
Yep.
Nothing's going to happen in that case until after the Danny Masterson criminal trial is concluded. But Scientology can't sit still in that case where it's actually a party. They are upset that numerous times in the first trial and in this trial, members of the LAPD detectives have come into court and talked about the harassment these women are going through.
Right.
Scientology denies that there's any harassment, and they've gone to the chief of police asking him to start internal affairs investigations of those detectives, claiming that they know there's no harassment going on from Scientology, and they're purposely leaving open investigations that should be closed.
Wow.
Well, that's nutty enough, Chris. That on its own is crazy enough that we learned that from the DA, because she was also going to the DA's office, basically going over the deputy DAs or Reinhold Mueller and Ariel Anson. She's aiming at their bosses, and that's what Scientology does. They never go at you. They don't have the guts to face you or face me, Chris. They try to go to people that we're connected to try to harm them, and that's what they're trying to do with Reinhold Mueller and Ariel Anson. Vicky Podreski was emailing her bosses, complaining about this, supposedly eliciting bogus testimony about harassment.
Right.
Well, in her email, there was a link, and it linked to a share file that had 12 folders full of the prosecution's redacted discovery material. And for those of you that aren't real familiar with court, what that means is, as the district attorney is gathering evidence against Danny Masterson, that's including emails between the victims and police, text messages, photographs, police reports. At some point ahead of trial, they have to hand over that to the defense. Mm-hmm. You have to share with the other side, but they redact it, to make sure that there's not certain, social security numbers or whatever. So the DA knows what that material looks like, and they recognized it. That's our redaction, right?
Yep.
How the heck does the Church of Scientology have all this material that the DA turned over to the defense? Let me tell you, I've been around these DAs for a couple of years now. They comport themselves just really traditionally in court. They're very polite. You never see them ruffled. But I can tell from having been around them, mm-hmm. they were livid. Mm. They were shocked. They are not happy that the Church of Scientology somehow has its hands on this material that was only meant for Danny's criminal defense.
Right.
So what to do about it? And I know there's a big question of, well, was this a violation? Were any laws broken? All I can tell you is the DA is really upset, and the judge was very concerned. So that first day on Wednesday, she talked about an order to show cause and maybe a post-trial evidentiary hearing. Mm-hmm. And I heard post-trial and I thought, they're going to wait for a long time. But then on Friday, they didn't say anything about it on Thursday. Friday, they brought it up again. This time, Sean Hawley was doing her best to minimize it. There was no protective order in place at the time, and a previous counsel for us might have been, forwarded in a civil proceeding, blah, blah. And see, I don't know if you remember, but Wednesday afternoon, I had suggested that they look at Tom Mesereau.
Right.
And Sean Hawley all but pinned it on Mesereau on Friday. Mesereau or his office, somebody in there, right? Mm-hmm. So really interesting that she kind of pointed to Mesereau. It seemed to me, she said previous counsel. And so now, after she minimized it on Friday, the DA came back and said, the DA was saying, listen, we don't want to make any statements, but he couldn't let that go. Mm-hmm. And he was just saying, this is extremely troubling. He's using, that's about as strong language as Reinhold Mueller is going to use. And the judge is very concerned. She kind of dressed down Sean Hawley and said, this is not a civil case. This is a criminal case. It has different rules. And there are just very, strict rules about sharing of discovery in a serious felony like this.
That's right.
So she asked Mueller, you're going to refer to this to law enforcement? He said, yes. And of course, the county DA referring to law enforcement, they're not going to the LAPD. They're going to either the state attorney general or maybe even the FBI. I don't know. Mm-hmm. That's what she's asking him about. And then the other thing she asked him was, are you going to be reporting to the California bar? Oh,
exactly.
So, again, we don't know what's going to happen, but what I saw on Friday was a DA's office that is still super angry about this, and a judge who's determined to get to the bottom of it. And the other thing she said on Friday that I thought was really interesting was that she said, remember, before she talked about a post-trial evidentiary hearing. Mm-hmm. Now she's talking about an evidentiary hearing once the jury has the case. Well, Chris, the jury's going to have the case Tuesday afternoon.
Exactly.
So we might have this hearing by, who knows, Wednesday, Thursday. I mean, it might take longer. They might need to subpoena these people and that kind of thing. But it's not going away. And it's a really interesting thing. And it just feeds into everything we know about Scientology. They've got to have their hands on this stuff because it's negative material about them. And then the victims, Marcy's law attorney, came to court on Friday to make sure they understood how upset they are, because this is private information in those emails from these victims handed over to the church. We've just heard 3 weeks of testimony, Chris, about how terrified these women are of the Church of Scientology and its harassment. Exactly. So what a violation of their rights. So that was the big revelation this week. But I don't want something else overshadowed. And because there's a lot of silly little things that happen to her. Ooh, Danny Masterson got upset for a couple minutes. Let me tell you what really, really mattered this week, besides the discovery leak.
Mm-hmm.
The prosecution brought in Detective Esther Reyes, who is now Detective Esther Mayape. But of course, we know her as Detective Reyes because that was her name when she became the lead investigator on this probe of Danny Masterson back in late 2016. When I first broke the news about this investigation on March 3rd, 2017, you can go back and look at my original story. And right from that point, what was the story? Not just that Danny was being investigated, but that these women were upset that the LAPD was mishandling it.
Right.
That was the key right from the start. Was I in that first story, I quoted from a letter written by, I called her Victim A then. Now she's, we think of her as Jane Doe 3. Jane Doe 3 complaining about how terrible this Detective Reyes was. That's always been a big part of the case. And so they replaced her with the Detective Vargas. And in the first trial, what was defense attorney Philip Cohen's main defense of his client? The number one thing he goes with is Detective Reyes told these women not to talk to each other or it would contaminate the case, and the women talked to each other anyway. That's the defense of Danny Masterson is built on that, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Central to entering in that reasonable doubt. Could they have colluded on their stories? Could they have mixed up their memories together? Could they be all saying the same things now because they talk to each other? That's how it would contaminate.
Now, when the women, the three victims, Jane Doe 1, 2, and 3, testified in this time,
mm-hmm.
they addressed that, and they were very specific about it. And they said, look, yeah, Detective Reyes told us not to talk to each other, but then Detective Reyes was doing strange stuff, mm-hmm. really, really bizarre things. Like they gave them a number to use for pretext that had already been burned, and she wasn't calling their witnesses. So they felt they had no choice but to talk to each other about how badly things were going, not about the details of their case, of their allegations, but just about, has she called your witness? What's going on? What's happening with this? Right. And the LAPD took it seriously enough to replace Reyes. Okay, so they really emphasized that this time. Yes, they talked to each other, but not about things that would contaminate the case. Okay, so now the prosecution brings Detective Reyes herself. And they did something that Cohen never thought to do last time. They actually asked her, Detective Reyes, was this case contaminated when these women talked to each other? And she said, in her opinion, no, this case was not contaminated. You could practically hear the air going out of the defense's tires at that point. I mean, it was stunning. The whole defense case is based on this. And they never asked her. The prosecution asked Detective Reyes, and she says, no, these women didn't contaminate this case. Oh, man. So then what does Cohen do is he's cross-examining her. He came at her 4 different ways. He realized she went from being his star witness to now he's trying to tear her down. I mean, right. It was amazing. And he couldn't. I mean, he was saying, you were only the lead detective for about 4 months, then you were replaced. So in 2017, 2018, 2019, you weren't invested. No, I wasn't involved. Then how do you know it was contaminated? See? So now he's gone from she was the pillar of his defense to now he's tearing her down. Wow, that was something to me. And I felt that was a major, move for the prosecution. And it's right near the end. So the jury's going to remember that especially, Exactly. So, yes, the discovery leak was the big news of the week, but it really was separate. It didn't have anything to do with Danny Masterson's guilt or innocence, whereas the Reyes thing goes directly to what this jury is supposed to consider.
Exactly. Well, I have to point out, just because I think it's important isn't it interesting how we're so sure like Reyes was being painted out as like this even pro Scientology. I wonder if she has Scientology ties. I had people communicating to me about that. Oh, I wonder if, I wonder if, I wonder if. And then here she is coming in, and they finally get the right question asked, and it all turns on a dime. And you go, hey, maybe we paint a little too quickly with some of these brushes of who is and isn't like pro Scientology and all that. Just wanted to bring that up, just a little point, but it's kind of like, the truth outs here if through proper procedure and all of that. Anyway, I just thought that was an important point here. Yes, this was huge. These were both gigantic things this week. I want to highlight, going back for a second on the discovery leak, that the Marsy's Law component of this is a big deal. That's a California thing. That's a California Constitution law about this kind of information, and sharing it, and resulting, if it would result in more harm, stalking, harassment, damage to a survivor. That's what this law is built to prevent, which is why it makes this a more serious offense to leak this material in California than it would in, say, some other states where they don't have laws covering this. And this could mean then that it's not just a slap on the wrist for whoever's responsible for this, or a monetary fine as a sanction, or even possible disbarment. There could be criminal ramifications, consequences from this. So I'm very, very curious to see where this is going to go. And apparently, did I have it right that Podbersky is like, oh no, I'll come in and explain it, or they were saying she was going to come in, and we were like, on Friday with my lawyer friend, we were like, what is she possibly going to go in there and say to make this all go away? Because if she had it, she was supposed to let somebody know, and she didn't let anybody know. If she let the defense team know, you'd think they would be under obligation to let the prosecutors know, hey, guess what? This material got into somebody else's hands. They didn't. It was radio silence. And so how she's going to go in there, and maybe she throws Messer under the bus, but she's kind of going to be liable herself as far as anything we could figure out. So we'll have to see how this plays out.
And I don't know what the penalties could possibly be. I just really think it's great well, first of all, the press row has been very empty for a couple of weeks now. Mm-hmm. All the reporters are going to be back on Tuesday for closing arguments. And so if they talk that day about, oh, by the way, tomorrow we're going to have this evidentiary hearing, I have a feeling it's going to be a lot of press coverage of it. So a lot of press coverage about getting to the bottom of this leak, and, getting Podbersky up there to explain herself. This is the last thing Scientology wants, because it really shows how insidious they are, how, what the hell are they getting involved in a criminal case anyway? It's just really good stuff that helps people understand that, yes, of course Scientology is doing this. This is what they do.
Exactly.
So, regardless of the penalties or whatever, I just think it's really great that the judge and the DA want to do some investigating out in the open, and that Scientology is going to be squirming on the witness stand trying to explain this thing. And I just think that, I just hope that the rest of already the story is getting picked up. I mean, I was talking about it Wednesday, and all of my reports on Wednesday were like, oh, there's the latest that we're learning. By Friday, you're starting to see it in the Daily Mail and and Deadline.com. Dominic Patton wrote something really good. So people are interested in this, and hopefully when they come back Tuesday for closing arguments, they're also going to be writing about that. So you can see a lot more about that.
Oh, big time. And if this goes south, if this goes in the direction of how there is actual, causative culpability on the part of the Church of Scientology, that's going to do nothing but throw logs on the bonfire of the civil case.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's going to be proof positive that, of course, they're stalking and harassing these women. Look how they're doing it right here.
Right there.
Right? There it is, I mean, wow. So, yeah, so it seems like a very, very big mistake was made there on Podbersky's part, and we'll have to see how this plays out. Okay, now there was another event that occurred, and something I wanted to ask you about, because I'm also slightly confused about it. We had Kathleen J give testimony. She was the uncharged but historical figure, witness that was brought in, who was also sexually assaulted allegedly by Danny Masterson. And she gave testimony to that fact. And in the course of that testimony, she mentioned you. And then as the result of that, there was a subpoena. And, you dodged that. Good, because I thought that was a little disturbing. But I didn't quite get what was the point of that either.
Yeah.
What did they expect to get out of you? And what was
in 2021, so all October 21, so almost 2 full years ago. For some reason, some other people seem to think it's much more recent, but almost 2 years ago, Kathleen J up in Toronto tweeted that she was also a Danny Masterson victim. And so I, was curious about that. So I contacted her, very clear as a reporter working on a story. I'd never spoken to her before. And I had a nice long conversation with her. She sent me a picture of herself from the year 2000 for my story, very clear what I was doing, and I published a story. Now, subsequent to that, she went to the Toronto PD. She testified about how she's been working with a memory expert. And so by the time she got called to come down to trial, she's remembered some things that were different than what I wrote about. And so she testified. And of course, the defense wanted to exploit that. They want to show the jury that what she told me 2 years ago is different than what she's saying on the stand. Now, Chris, as a journalist, I don't want to be involved, and I don't care what they think of my story. I'm not there to be used to contradict a rape victim. So when they brought a subpoena to me, I got a hold of my attorney that night, and he wrote me a letter to give to the judge, reminding her that 2 years ago, they also tried to subpoena me, Tom Mesereau did, for my records involving the other victims, and she had quashed it. So he reminded her of that, but also the California Constitution has a strong reporter shield law that if you're going to drag a reporter into the case, you at least have to give them some time and have a hearing about it. And once Scott put that in the letter, I thought, there's no way, that's killer. And it was. So the next morning, the Judge Olmedo had asked the two sides if they worked out something acceptable to both sides so you don't need this reporter. And they hadn't been able to come to an agreement. She said, okay, well, I got a letter from Mr. Ortega's attorney, and according to the Constitution, he's right. I can't even consider this for at least 5 days. So we're going to have to put this whole trial on hold, closing arguments. I'll just see you next Wednesday. She was just trying to put pressure on them.
Right.
And so of course nobody wants that. And so the two sides worked out a stipulation about what my article said without me having to testify about that or anything. Whether that's going to have any effect on the jury, who knows? Again, my involvement was simply that I called up this woman who said she was a Danny Masterson victim 2 years ago and wrote a story. And she said some different things this time. And again, people have asked me about that, some things she said about me. Look, we're still waiting for a verdict. You think I'm going to say anything about that? And even after the verdict, I may not say anything. I refuse to put myself, even if I have a different, recollection of what happened, I refuse to put myself in the position of contradicting or criticizing a rape victim. And if that means some people are going to think some bad things about me, well then, okay. Look, when you're a journalist, you're not always making friends, Chris. It's not the most fun job in the whole world.
I wouldn't know anything about that, Tony. Listen, I totally get it. And, look, public perception of you, me, of what we're doing. I saw something this week where somebody said I was a plant. What am I supposed to do? Dude, I've got 1,000 hours of content here that very much proves I'm not a plant. So, but people, but here's what I say, right? Is people are going to go with their feelings over the facts 100% of the time, when especially strong feelings. And I get it. And this is not even directed to any one person at all. It's everybody. Yeah. It is what it is. And this is not a popularity contest. And what we're trying to do is expose the truth of a destructive cult. And that is a controversial, trauma-laden, difficult task on the best of days.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in the drama of this any more than I think my viewers are, right? And so,
well, I mean, the real drama on Friday, Chris, was that the prosecution said they're not calling any more witnesses, and there were a few more on their list, but they just didn't go. And then the defense had said they were going to call Detective Vargas because the prosecution wasn't going to, but they decided, like last time, not to call any witnesses at all. Which again is not unusual. The defense case in a trial like this really is the cross-examination of the prosecution witnesses, and it was enough last time to produce enough reasonable doubt to keep the jury from coming up with unanimous verdicts. Yep. And we had a hung jury. Are we going to get that this time, Chris? I don't know. I mean, now that I've seen the whole case, I have to say the prosecution did a much better job. The order of things. Here's a small thing I want to tell you that happened this week, for example. In the first trial, the last witness we heard from was Rachel S., who was a good friend of Jane Doe 2's. And it was kind of like the very end, it just felt like it was kind of not a little confusing why she was there at that point. It felt like she was, a little bit wasted. This time, they moved her up in the order. And also, after a time when we hadn't heard anything about Scientology for a couple of days. And Rachel S. was so great because she was a hardcore Scientologist when Jane Doe 2 came to her to tell her that she'd been attacked by Masterson. And again, numerous times in this retrial, really what it characterizes it is we've gotten not just more Scientology material, but into the Scientology mindset again and again. Yes. And she had just one of the most amazing examples of that, where she said not only was it difficult for her as a Scientologist to hear Jane Doe 2 talking about herself as a victim, because that's, you're a degraded being. You're not supposed to be a victim. You're supposed to be a cause, right? Not only was it hard for her to hear her friend talking about being victimized, but she said she wasn't supposed to think bad thoughts about Danny Masterson. Don't make me think that. Stop talking about him like that. I can't think of him like that.
That's right.
Oh, I mean, what a great crystallization of the mindfuck that Scientology is, expressed by this Rachel S. And like I said, it was also striking because for a couple of days up to that, we hadn't heard too much about Scientology. So she really brought back Scientology in a strong way. Also in this last week, along with the Reyes thing that really undercut the defense. So I think there's a lot of reasons to think that this jury has the opportunity, if they paid attention to Scientology, paid attention to the experts, paid attention to the narratives with these women, that they may have a different result this time than last time. But, after that last time, Chris, I'm so gun shy about trying to predict what's going to happen. I really don't know. No. So but it's coming quick. I mean, Tuesday. So what's going to happen? One quick note about that on Tuesday is that normally the way it goes, the way it went last time was Deputy DA Reinhold Mueller talks for an hour and a half, maybe up to 2 hours. Then Philip Cohen presents the defense closing argument for at least that long, if not a little longer. And then Mueller gets to come on one more time, and he's the last word that the jury hears. Now, this time, Judge Charlene Olmedo, asked Cohen and Sean Hawley, are you going to break it up? In other words, it still has seemed like it's been Philip Cohen's show. I mean, Sean Hawley's done some really interesting cross-examinations, and it's been really interesting seeing her addition to the defense team, but it's still pretty much Cohen's thing. And so she was asking now, so let's say the defense closing argument is 2.5, 3 hours. Going to give Cohen an hour and a half and then Sean Hawley an hour and a half? In other words, it seemed to me like the judge seemed to think that they could do that in her court, is break it up. And it was hard for me to hear, Chris, but it sounded like Hawley was kind of saying, we can't do that. Like, you're not supposed to do that. So that suggested to me that Cohen's going to do the whole defense thing. However, in that same conversation, I think I heard the DA saying that they are going to do that, so that we might get Reinhold Mueller starting out with the state's, closing argument. then Cohen, and then Ariel Anson come on to
Right.
do the final part, or the other way around. I don't know.
Okay.
But I got the impression they're talking about splitting it, just like they've been splitting a lot of the work during the testimony. So that's all going to be something we're looking for Tuesday, and of course we're looking to see how the DA puts together all these stronger elements, more drugging allegations, more Scientology details, and then of course the brutal testimony of these three women. That's a big, salad he's got to put together and arrange things correctly and make sure it all comes out strong. He was pretty strong in the first trial. He used some real strong language in his closing. He actually did call Danny Masterson a monster in the first closing argument. So we'll see what kind of language he uses this time. And then with Cohen, he really hammers the presumption of innocence, reasonable beyond reasonable doubt. And if I remember correctly, he also he just really attacked these women as fabricators. He kind of came out with it a little bit more in the closing. So that's what we can expect on Tuesday. It'll probably take all day, and then the jury goes, and we'll just see how long it takes this time.
That's right. That's right. I remember his closing last time. They had some graph or some graphics or something up, and remember the jury was asking for those, and the judge was like, "That ain't evidence. No, you're not getting that again." That was in the closing argument, guys. That was from the lawyer, not from the actual evidence you're supposed to consider. So it was see how
I'm sure that chart will be back. Apparently, it's pretty effective. But if you remember, before this retrial started, she ordered him to make a change on it. The prosecution brought it up that there was some wording on there that was a little improper, and so she told him he had to change that. But I'm sure he'll be using that at the same time this time as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm in the same boat as you in terms of expect the worst, hope for the best. Both fingers crossed, thoughts and prayers, et cetera, et cetera. Because who knows? Like we were so sure last time the Scientology was an influence, and then not really. This time it's got to be. I mean, it was just slammed home so many times. And in terms of their mindset and in terms of what the church was doing behind the scenes. And I think, from my way of thinking about things, of course, and I'm not unbiased, that matters. That speaks to the actual the validity of the claims, as well as the supporting witnesses who were being told back then it happened. Why would that be happening if it hadn't happened? That kind of thing. Anyway, it was kind of interesting to read about E. Jean Carroll's trial with Trump and the parallels, because this is happening was happening same time, and the verdict came back on that one, and that's a civil trial, so lower threshold of guilt, but he came back, he was liable, so we're really hoping for that positive outcome this time, and hoping that this week that we're in now, that is what is produced here. We hope they go in and out. So that all being said, I guess we'll hear those closing arguments on Tuesday and go from there and see what else the week brings in terms of reporting. It's going to be a wild one.
I've got a new whale report coming out this morning. I hope everybody takes a look at that. It's always very interesting to see who the big whales are keeping Scientology afloat with their gigantic donations. I've got another report from that private investigator who has come forward, some more details about some skullduggery committed by Scientology's private investigators. I've got that coming out at sometime this week. So yeah, I mean, there's other stuff going on, and also we got this attempt for an appeal in the Baxter trafficking case. Nothing as important as what's going on right here, right now in Los Angeles with the trial. We're on it, but always, Chris, we're looking at multiple other stories. We've got them coming for you. Come to TonyOrtega.substack.com. Sign up for free emails, and you'll never miss a story. They come right to your inbox.
Every day. I'm certainly reading them. All right, folks. And the last thing I want to say, I guess, is just, tensions are high right now. Let's remember we are kind of all trying to make the same thing happen here. And that's all I want to say about any of that. And that all being said, thank you very much for coming around and watching the show this week. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye.